And thank you everyone for coming on at 3 p.m., at least 3 p.m. Pacific, where I am. I know some of you guys are coming from all over the place, so thank you for joining us. So my name is Joe Kim, as Ricky said, and I am the creative director, and I like to say creative director and janitor for PAL Campaign because pretty much it's like a one-man show. And very soon, with me getting married, my fiance will take a huge part of the business side of things, which is great. Um, but yeah, PAL Campaign started about 10 years ago, and it started because of a problem that I saw, or some kind of conflict that I saw personally as a young person. We would go to all of these conferences with our church, and every time we went to a conference meant conference T-shirts, and conference T-shirts for church usually meant really bad design. And so that's kind of the origin story for me. So we would go to all these conferences. We would have shirts that I would never wear. It would always go to the pajama drawer or like the rag drawer. And then one day when I became one of the youth leaders, so I was kind of the one of the younger people on the core team. The youth minister at that time, she asked me to design the shirt for a Steubenville West conference. And so we made this 12-hour trek on a bus to Arizona from California. And we all had these bright yellow shirts that just said Steubenville on it. And the reason why that one was different was because it didn't have a picture of Jesus. It didn't have a picture of a cross. It didn't have a picture of a dove. Not because I thought those things were inadequate to be on the T-shirt, but just because I was a young person that just wanted to be different. And so I just wrote Steubenville in this diagonal font, Steubenville. And it was so silly and it's so dumb. But once we got there, we got all of these comments, people, just because they've never seen something like that. So people started saying, where'd you get those shirts? Who made them? And that kind of momentum led to me designing the next Steubenville West shirt, and the next camp shirt, and then the next retreat shirt, and then graphic design for the youth ministry I eventually took over. And so it just kind of grew from there. And I would say the first collection for PAL Campaign grew out of some of the camp shirts or retreat shirts and conference shirts that I designed. I would take out the date and then just put it on as a seller, right? So that's kind of how it started. And just incredible experiences, giving shirts to people like Matt Maher and Audrey Assad and all these things. And then eventually life kind of got in the way, and grad school. And so I shut down PAL Campaign. And then about 3 to 4 years ago now, I would say, I restarted it as a part of my final project for grad school. And it's been a blessing ever since.
That's so awesome. I know a lot of us buy a lot of PAL Campaign stuff. I'm a big fan personally, and I know a few of other people too are. But yeah, going more into our session a little bit, what we're going to start doing too is asking our speakers to come on just a few icebreaker questions just to get them, just to get to know them a little bit better. So I guess one of the first questions is, who or what is your biggest inspiration?
Oh man. Okay, who or what is my biggest inspiration? In terms of design specifically, I would say this guy named Jeff Sheldon. He's the founder of a company called UG or UG Monk, however you want to call it. But he's really good at simple, minimal design, a hard focus on craftsmanship and quality, and just being completely himself. And so I would say he would be my biggest, mentor in the space of design, considering that he's someone I've never met. I've reached out to him a few times, but the way he runs his business, he just runs it by himself as well with his family. And he's so transparent about, where he would store his shirts, or in his basement of his parents, or in the basement of his parents' house. And he shows his family messing around and all this stuff. But he has this, uber successful company based around really good intentional design. So I really like that. In terms of inspiration every day, I would say my future self, because I love goal setting, and I love knowing that there's always a better place that I can get to. And that doesn't mean that I'm not content with where I am, but I know that it's a lifelong journey. It's a race that you run to the end. So I would say inspiration, my future self.
I like that. I like the future self. I think that's something that I don't know, like a lot of us as designers, as creatives don't really look at. You know, there's these goals that we want to set and we want to kind of achieve, right? And I think that's really cool. That's awesome. Next question is, what is your favorite design that you've made, whether it be for PAL Campaign or for somebody else?
Yeah. My favorite design is usually the one I just made. Um, and so I would say right now I'm working on a collection, and the only other person who knows about this is my fiance, who's actually on this call too. She's supporting us, but it's a collection that I'm releasing probably by the end of January or start of February, called Let There Be Light, and it's all around this idea of God as light. And so probably one of the designs in that collection, there's one like simplified stained glass one that I've just been crushing on stained glass designs and stained glass in general, and so it's probably something like that. In terms of a design I've created before, I would probably say the I will not be shaken, the not be shaken design.
Oh yeah, I agree. That's one of my favorite designs for me too, for sure. All right, so like I said in the beginning, today's theme is storytelling, and this is probably one of our most requested topics to talk about for our sessions. Because I think for us as creatives, sometimes we struggle with creating a narrative and finding a meaning behind our art, right? I know that's specific for me too, and I know a few other people here too could relate to that. And so just to kind of just get things started, what have you done through PAL Campaign to kind of create like a story, or how has storytelling been interwoven into your creative process?
Sure. Yeah, I think the idea of storytelling, or including a narrative, as a part of whatever it is you're doing, even if you are not an artist, right? And all of us here are artists or creatives in some way, whether it's photography or music or writing or graphic design. But even if it's not that, I think the power and the art of storytelling is really important for us to be able to connect on an emotional level and to get our ideas across. That's the power of storytelling, simply in that it connects all of us on this deeply emotional level, right? And so ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all about emotion. And so for me, with PAL Campaign, when I first started, storytelling was not an important part of it. And when I started designing, storytelling was definitely not a part of it. It was just whatever I thought was cool, and I would just make that, right? There would be no soul behind it. It was just all facade. And I realized, once I began to live life a little bit more, um, and mess up and fail and sin and find redemption and receive forgiveness and all of these stuff and all of these complex human emotions that we begin to experience, once those kinds of stories started becoming a part of my story, it just naturally began to infuse itself into the designs that I created and the quotes that I would share, and so on and so forth. And so for me, the power of storytelling in whatever medium is so important, because it gives it some soul. And it's a high consideration whenever I start. I know in a little bit we're going to get into the process, at least my process, and so I'll share a little bit more about that then. But yeah, for example, when I first started, the About Us for PAL Campaign was about 3 lines, and it tried to be so cool, and it made no sense. I probably read some about us from some billion-dollar company, and I copied that and mimicked that in some way, but it had nothing to do with who I was and my experiences and my unique experiences. And so the story changed for me. what I share is deeply meaningful for me. And so, and as a result, every time I've done that, whether it's a good design objectively that I think, or subjectively, I guess, or whether it's a very simple design, every time I feel I've created something from that place, it's always connected and it's always hit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, storytelling is very important in design. You know, like I love what you said, putting feeling, giving a soul to the design. I think that's really awesome. Um, but for me, storytelling came very hard. You know, trying to formulate this narrative within a design when sometimes it may seem like there is no narrative, there is no story. So, Joe, I want to kind of get your perspective and kind of just share your process of how to make this narrative, how to make your art speak out in a story.
Yeah, sure. So this is a little bit difficult in the sense that I think it's a lot easier, or easier in a sense, if you're actually writing a story, right? Like there's a character and a hero, and then eventually the hero is going to do this thing, or whatever it is. But sometimes people say, well, how can you tell a story in a photograph, or how can you tell a story in a social media post about an event? And so there's different levels of all of this, but I think even in those things, you definitely can tell a story. And you can create an emotion, right? For me, again, story is all about emotion because that's a universal connector. Um, but in terms of, let's say, in the sense of creating a t-shirt design, just because that's my domain. So my process generally will start with determining a motive. So for, ask yourself, there are three, for me at least, when I create a piece, there are three different motives that I can go to, three major themes. Number one, it can educate or explain, right? It can be some kind of explanatory piece. I would say that the Highway to Heaven design for Carlo Acutis was kind of an educational and explanatory piece of what kind of life he led, what kind of saint he was. And then something else could inspire and influence. So where you're trying to convey a message or motivate people to do something. For me, the Not Be Shaken is that, because it just continually reminds me and inspires me not to be shaken by the external circumstances of this world, right? Or it can be self-expressive, right? It just purely as a self-expressive artistic piece. In terms of PAL campaign, I would say the most self-expressive was probably in a design called All of Me. It had this hand going up and this hand going down. It just said All of Me. And I created that just during a time where I felt the faith that I professed and the life that I was living seemed at opposite ends of each other. And I said, God, even in this moment, you still have to, for me, I had to reconcile the fact that God still was going to accept me. And so I just said, take all of me, right? My virtue, my vice, all this stuff. And so that was like a purely self-expressive thing for me. So once you determine one of those things, I would say, is it educational? Is it inspirational? Or is it self-expressive? Then you can think about from that point, okay, what is the element of this piece that I can use to connect with a lot of people? And so that connection is very important for me. And that's not to say you want to pander or you want to just do something to connect with a bunch of people on a false level, but what's a unique experience that you have to connect? So, I don't know if you guys have this experience, but sometimes, usually on the precipice of some kind of conflict or sadness, you'll inevitably end up on some page that's selling you something. It's just this one long web page, and it's like, maybe you've been struggling as a photographer, and it's a page that shows you how to be a successful wedding photographer, right? And it goes through all of these things, all these pain points. Have you felt like this? Have you felt like that? And it's just like all of these connection points, right? So what is that moment of connection with someone else? And then potentially, what is going to lead someone to something different? Like, how is it going to transform them? And so usually those one-page things work because there's that, it's not just doom and gloom. Eventually it shows some kind of transformative different result, right? I think that's why the story of salvation history, is so captivating because of that dramatic, redemption and transformation. And then after those two things, you determine your direction. you decide how is it going to connect with people, and what is the what is that moment of change or transformation that you can kind of inspire, right? So maybe someone who wears the "I will not be shaken" shirt is someone who has a lot of anxiety, right? And just has to remember, has to transform and remember that um, God's got this. You're not alone. And so once you determine those three things, then for me at least, I just begin gathering inspiration, right? A lot of people create mood boards. They go on Pinterest and create a board. They print things out. They write little notes that they hear at mass or listen to on a song, whatever it is, right? Gathering information and inspiration. And this part was really tricky for me because, I used to think that if I'm going to create this really, effective, positive piece, I have to be the foremost expert in that, right? For instance, I'm creating this stained glass design right now. And maybe 2 years ago, I would have spent months, literally months, going to libraries, going to churches, taking pictures of every stained glass I could see, and finding every pin I could find on Pinterest. But now I'm kind of in this moment where I feel like the thing I find is the thing I find, right? And the thing that shows up is the thing that shows up. And it's meant to show up for you to help you do whatever it is. So sometimes in this gather inspiration phase, like don't get that, analysis paralysis. Just recognize that that your experiences, the life you lived, and the things that are in front of you are the things that are going to help inform whatever it is you create. So gather things, and you're going to want to gather things because they already speak to you and they already work on you on an emotional level, right? So just trust that. And then next in the process is just do it, right? This is kind of like that trial and error phase. So again, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. I wish I could quote that. I don't know who said it. Someone cool said it. But take that imperfect action. You don't have to be perfectly ready to create something effective and powerful. In fact, I already think if you're in a position to create something, let's say you happen to get a job from a client, or they happen to reach out to you, and even if you're telling yourself over and over again, they messed up. Why did they ask me? Or I'm not ready for this, or I'm not good enough. I'm not good as that person who I admire, etc. Just do it, because if that opportunity has been presented to you, you are ready and you were meant to do it, right? Even if it's going to be a learning experience. And so just do it. And then I would say last in that sequence, and I actually had to create this sequence in preparation for this, but this is what I realized is the exact 5-step process that I take to design anything. The last thing is enhance whatever piece you're doing, whether it's design or music or whatever else it is, with your particular skills. And so, and what I mean by that is, at this point, that's when you can use all the technology. That's when you can take your photo into Lightroom. That's when you can, buy a $20 subscription to Photoshop if you want to. But tools are never really, in my opinion, tools are never the important part of this thing. Tools are tools, and they can enhance it for sure. But it's always the message that you're trying to convey that's the most important, right? A lot of people try to buy, the best things and the best clothes and the best thing to, be prepared for whatever it is they're doing. But 95% of designs that people are doing, okay, maybe not 95%, maybe like 70% of the designs that people are creating on Illustrator or Photoshop, you can create on Google Slides. I really believe that. And probably 90% of the things that people are doing, you can create on Canva. Canva is an online design platform. And so tools are your last thing. Let tools enhance the previous things that you've already done up to that point.
All awesome stuff, Joe. I love when you were talking about analysis paralysis. That for as creatives, we often get stuck in that kind of that ditch of trying to figure out oh, is this idea really good, or is this idea really worth putting out? We overanalyze things. So I love that. I love that point that you put, and also the quote that you said, "Don't let perfection be the enemy of good." Yeah, that's I feel that's something that I struggle with a lot. And I know other people here too can attest to that. Um, and it wasn't until like I really put my pride aside and said, this art isn't just for me, it's for me to connect to people. So I want to go on that subject too when it comes to storytelling about connecting to people, and how we have a unique perspective as creatives who are Catholic. So I just want to get your perspective on this, on how can we use storytelling and our art to evangelize?
Yeah, that's a great question. Ultimately, I think that has to be the mission of Christian Catholic artists, right, or artists in general, is like to tell the truth and to evangelize and to fulfill that mission. Again, I think it has to be based on your unique experiences, allowing your unique experiences and your touch points and your experiences of all the good stuff in our faith, in our relationship with Christ. All of those little pieces that we've experienced, hopefully we have experienced some in our life, right? Otherwise, it'll be really hard to keep going. Is to be able to translate that and to allow other people to feel that emotion. So for me, when I think about faith, uh, and I realized this recently, I realized this last month, is actually there's a certain type of story that always gets me um, to have a very, very high degree of emotion, or a certain type of story that always makes me cry, just like instantly. I don't cry often, but whenever I see some kind of film or art piece or literature that has this theme, it happens instantly. And it's that one of the prodigal sons. So, you know, where so that's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. This guy gives up everything he has and does it in a very disgusting way, lives this life, realizes he's wrong, and then makes this decision to come back and not even be accepted, like not even be, reclaim what was his, but just be on a lower level, just to cover the basic necessities, right? And maybe one could even argue that he didn't even have a change of heart at that point. He just wanted to, again, kind of, take care of himself, right? So hey, man, I still don't think I want to do all that stuff, but at least I want to get food. So just hire me as one of your workers, right? And then he comes back, and not only does he get that he's not sure if he's going to get because he's offended his dad so much, but now he gets to be fully re-embraced, right? He sees the dad running toward him to embrace him and to give him a robe and to give him a ring and to kill the fattest calf, and that level of forgiveness for me and acceptance, just full acceptance, is something that I struggle with personally. And when I think about that particular theme, that theme of forgiveness, theme of redemption, it just triggers something in me, right? And that motivates me more to believe in a Christ that's merciful and loving than a lot of theology that I read, right? And so, and I realized that it's that theme because, I was thinking about some of my favorite books, and that same thing happens in Les Miserables, where Jean Valjean steals some, silver and all this stuff from the bishop's house, and he's so traumatized, and he's working from such a place of scarcity that he steals all this stuff. And then when somebody catches him and brings him back to the bishop says, "Oh yeah, he forgot these candlesticks too, that are made of gold," right? And transformation happens with Jean Valjean at that point, right? And then, okay, so all that to say, I realized this recently when I was watching Guardians of the Galaxy. There's that one character who's the whistling guy, and then whenever he whistles, like that sharp thing just kind of goes through people. Anyways, apparently he was a bad character. I don't even know his name, but in the end, he ultimately redeems himself by sacrificing, spoiler alert, giving up his life, right? And so for me, again, just the idea of you were once lost and now you're found, that's a huge theme for me. And I'm sure that's a huge thing for everybody. at some point in their lives. And so we've all messed up, right? And we've all been forgiven to a certain extent. And so for me, when I'm thinking about how can I influence young students, I work at a high school, I used to be campus minister, um, to come to know Christ, then I think about that theme of mercy, right? How can I show that in the art? And I have some legitimacy, and I have a place to back that up because I felt that so many times in my life, right? And so um, I would say that's the most powerful way, at least for me in my experience so far, to allow someone to experience what you're experiencing or to evangelize, because then you have a firsthand experience of that. I think that's why Paul was so effective in his evangelization, because he also went through something like that. And then he was so transformed by that acceptance, that unconditional acceptance, that he spent the rest of his life evangelizing, right? And he was so urgent in that evangelization because he said, I know where I've been, I know what I feel now, and I want you to have that feeling too.
That's awesome. Yeah. Um, so kind of building off of that, and building off of, storytelling, creating this process. I kind of want to throw out like a hypothetical situation, and maybe some of you relate to this too. But let's say we've been creating for 5 years, like a really long time, 5-10 years. But we haven't had that feeling of connecting with people or creating this narrative, or we've experienced burnout to a point where we're just throwing out stuff for the heck of it. So my question to you is, how do we keep storytelling consistent in our art?
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. I would say I was experiencing that actually at the end of the last year and the beginning of this year. So as 2020 transitioned into 2021, and there's so many emotional things going on in the world and so on, storytelling and trying to be authentic can be hard, right? Because you want to be consistent, you want to produce all this stuff, and then you end up just kind of like putting out whatever kind of filler stuff, right? That you're not necessarily too excited about. And I think that's okay too. I think I don't think life is meant to be running on red line, like just this jubilant experiences all the time. I think we do need moments of spiritual dryness, creative dryness. Those allow for that kind of arc to come back up. But for me, I was noticing, like I wouldn't post for 2 days, and then that very quickly turned into no posting for 7 days, and so on and so forth. But if you're feeling that burnout and you're feeling, just like you aren't making an impact or you aren't connecting and you're running through all these stuff, I would say keep a journal. For me, journaling has been kind of a lifesaver. I would say about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I went through a really kind of horrible breakup, and it was a pivotal moment in my life where I learned a lot and I was very humbled. And journaling just kind of accidentally came into my life, and I think it really helped me to have a channel to express myself and to kind of reconcile and work through a lot of the emotions that I was feeling. But nowadays, I would say journaling has, and that's when I started liking the process of journaling. But nowadays, journaling is kind of a chronicle of just random experiences. And when you journal and you look back on your journal, you just realize there are so many stories in your day, so many unique experiences that you have, so many insightful moments, because it can be a channel from God to you, right? It can be this beautiful, beautiful place where you're getting insights and reflections that you otherwise would not have gotten when you're scrolling or when you're trying to get inspiration in other ways. And so journaling is a huge thing. I would say, tap back into, there's a famous storyteller. I forget what his name was, but one thing he said about stories and getting ideas for stories, he said, think about the first, the last, the best, and the worst. So these are usually really high emotion story origins, right? Your first kiss, your last day on the job of some place, whatever. Your best the best funnel cake you ever had in your life after a day of roller coasters at Magic Mountain, the worst taco you've ever had in your life, or whatever, right? Like, and so first, last, best, and worst, and those are really good points of just tapping into that story. And I would say the third thing I would highly recommend is silence. Silence is a very loud. Um, Silence can be deafening in the sense that it'll allow you to kind of gather all of these different ideas that you've been just inundated with. I really don't think we're meant to have so much bombarded to us, and so silence will allow you to kind of filter through those things, gain a deeper trust of your own intuition, and then ultimately your own intuition is what you're meant to produce anyways, in the terms of storytelling. So
Yeah, I love that that thing you just said about silence being so loud and being kind of like a strong sense of inspiration, at least for me, in silence, just in prayer, or whether it's just like going to the beach or just in my room, just listening. I think it says a lot of things for being, something that doesn't say anything, it's silence. And there's something powerful about that. So I really love that point. So I have one more question before I turn it over to some of you guys who may have some questions. But this is a question that we've been asking some of the speakers to answer, just to kind of just share. But what is your advice, or some words that you want to say to the next generation of artists for the church?
yeah, as someone who also feels like a part of that kind of that rising swell of the Catholic Church's history has been so rich and steeped in art, right? And they valued so much of that that visual learning, part and parcel partly because a lot of people couldn't read back then, so they had to teach through images, but also because we're very sensual beings, right? And the Catholic faith is a very sensual faith. There's so much sights and sounds and feels, and you go to a church and it's just like living theology everywhere, right? And so and then unfortunately, for whatever reason, for a while the church wasn't a leader in the arts as it used to once be. And so I would say that, if everything works in cycles, and there was a high point of art in the church, and we kind of dipped down for a variety of reasons, and now we're on this upswell, right? And I would say you're part of a movement that's an incredible movement, right? Every day, I ask myself, man, we are in historic times, not just because of what I just said, but because of all that's going on in the world. But we're in historic times also because we're at a place in history, at a very unique place in history, where we're starting to say, no, this is very important too, right? Beauty can lead to goodness, can lead to truth, right? And if our goal is to evangelize, it's incumbent on us, and it's a priority for us to really use the talents that we receive from God to help better the world, and to bring people closer to Christ. And so just remember that your job is not in vain. Every Instagram post is not in vain. Every picture, every music you write, those things are not in vain. You are doing good work that's going to affect someone. So number one, just a reminder about that. Number two, I would say your art can heal yourself, and it can heal others. So that's another connection point to, I guess, making the world a better place. But for me, my art has been very healing for me, in the sense that it's allowed me to be self-expressive. It's allowed me to explore talents and skill sets that I didn't think I had. And so if it heals you, it can heal others, and it can inspire others. And so, use that as another point. And then one thing that just came to me, the creative act is one of God's greatest acts, right? God is a very expansive growing, creative God. And so when you're creating whatever it is, whether it's a pizza that you bake tonight, or whether it's a sketch, or whether it's a photograph, or whether it's graphic design, you're participating in that divine creative act. And for that moment, you get to experience what that feels like. And so, I mean, for me, there's no other better way than to also experience that, right? And then when you create something, you become proud of it. And I feel like it just gives us glimpses of God's heart, you know. Sometimes I create a piece and I like it so much that I just keep going back to look at it. And man, if I do that with something I created with my human frailty, then what God created in us, he must come back and look at us all the time. And that makes me emotional. It's just how much God, the creator, can look at us like the best piece of work that we've created, right? And that's a beautiful thing. So to be able to do that in parallel with God is an honor and a privilege. And I hope you guys continue.